When you think about it, life is really just one big roguelike. This is Fragments of Silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon, the European interviews. Joining us this week, all the way from the Ukraine, is Volodymyr Yakubovych of Muzt.
Yakubovych.
Sorry. um, it's always a bit of a dice roll when we try to pronounce names not in our native tongue. Anyway, so with that in mind, right. So, how we like to start things with the interview is we like to get to know the people behind the game, behind the studio, and so on and so forth. And we do that by asking them what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level.
Oh, it's a good question. I loved video games since I was a very little kid because I started playing on the bootleg NES console when I was 4 years old, and that hobby of video gameplay of gaming just persuaded me throughout my life. And when I was a teenager, I decided that I want to create my own games, the games of my dreams, dream projects, you may call it. And I started to learn things, to learn to draw, to learn to code, to learn everything, basically. And here I am now, making games.
Indeed. And how long have you been working at the process of making video games?
Oh, I started making video games in 2011. So it's 9 years now.
That is quite a while. Like, and I suppose in terms of game development, have you always been an indie developer, or have you like worked in larger spaces within the games industry?
Mm. So the first 4 years from 2011 to 2015, I was just it was just a hobby. I was making games basically for different jams for myself.
Right.
And after that, my skills were improving over time, and I attended to one game development conference in my home city of Lviv, and I met their guys from Dragon's Games team, and they invited me to work on their studio as a game designer. So I worked on this, frankly speaking, not a very big indie studio for almost 3 years. And after that, I pursued my solo career as an indie guy, as a one-man army, one-man development indie game developer.
I see. And what was it like working with a team versus being a one-man band here?
Well, when you are working alone, you have much more artistic freedom, and but within a team, it's things are much easier because you can split tasks between several people, and it saves lots of time. And when you work alone, you can't do this. You can count only on yourself. So it's a little bit harder, but teaches you self-discipline, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what games did you work on? At the studio, like anything that people might recognize.
Oh, those were not very. Those games hadn't become very famous to be honest. I was working on an parody RPG game that was called Mad North's Probably an Epic Quest. And the second project of the studio was an RTS game called Terran, but I wasn't involved in that project much.
Okay. And what precipitated your desire to leave the team and go out on your own?
Well, you might have known that most indie games are not profitable because the market is oversaturated nowadays, and it's really hard to get attention to reach out to your audience. And those two games that I mentioned before, they weren't financially successful because, as I said, the marketing was a complete disaster, and the studio went bankrupt, basically.
Yeah, that's a story we've heard before on the show.
Yeah, it's a very common story.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but it happens. And so, do you develop games full time, or is this a part time affair these days?
For the last 3 years or so, I am developing games full time, but sometimes I take some freelance jobs whenever I need some extra money and fast.
Once again, that's not unusual. Like freelancing is kind of the contract's lifeblood for indie game devs. Like, and anyway, looking at your website, you've made quite a few games. What was your first solo project?
All of these games that are mentioned on my website, except of Mad North's Probably an Epic Quest that I mentioned before, are my solo games.
Right. I mean, my question is, which one came first?
The first was they are listed in chronological order. The first one was Rules of the Shadow Realm.
Okay, and was it a difficult like how difficult did you find doing that game versus developing something now? Like how far have your skills come in the intervening years?
Oh, sometimes I like to open my old sources of my old projects, some of my very old games, like let's say Rules of the Shadow Realm, and whenever I take a look at this source code, I become terrified and quickly close. Things were much simpler back in the day because I wasn't making anything really complex because I was lacking skill. But on the other hand, it was hard because I just started to learn all these things. But now I know lots of things, and but in terms of complexity, everything remains very complex because I'm making more complex games now. I hope that I was that you could understand me.
No, that's perfect. I understood it. Did you guys understand that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So anyway, so your latest project, I guess, or latest projects, the Nighton series, or rather, okay, you got Nighton here and Nighton Plus, or Nighton Cross.
It's Plus.
Okay, it's Plus. Well, is Nighton Plus here a remake of Nighton, or is it like a sequel?
Oh, it's a question that I was asked lots of times. So, 19 Plus started as a Pixel Day 2018 submission. So there is a website called Newgrounds.com. It was a very big Flash portal back in the day, and sometimes they hold different game jams on their website. And one of these recurring game jams is called Pixel Day. Pixel Day comes every year in January. So I participated in Pixel Day in the 2018, and my entry was called simply 19. I made it in 2 weeks, and suddenly it won the first place. And I received tons of positive feedback, and that encouraged me to forge this little 15-minute long game into a really into something really big, into a full scale game. And that's why 19 plus has this plus in the name. It resembles the extended version, so plus means much more content than in original.
I get what you're saying. It's an
It's
expanded
like Cave Story and Cave Story Plus.
Right, right. I mean, once again, this is something we've encountered before. A game jam game that did so well that it managed to get into to become a full experience.
Yeah.
Because 9 plus here is 4 dungeons versus, I'm assuming, like the original version was like 1 dungeon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
So
totally right.
yeah. So yeah, this game has enough content in it where it could be released commercially,
Mm-hmm.
and
And also the code base was improved, the graphics were improved in the
right.
plus version, and there were tons of really small things, but they make the overall experience much more enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah, and right, for those who might not know, what is Nighton? What is Nighton Plus?
Oh.
As a game, who are you? What are you doing, and all that stuff.
So let me start about the genre of the
Okay.
19 or 19 plus. Well, it doesn't matter because both games share similar genre. So I like to call it Zelda-like game. Why it is so? So if you are familiar, and I bet that you are, with classic top-down 2D Legend of Zelda games like Link to the Past or Oracle of Seasons or Minish Cap, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
But
yes.
It looks more or less, I think, most like the original Zelda, just with a slightly higher, graphic fidelity.
Link to the Past was my biggest inspiration in terms of graphics. So
Yeah, no, I'm just going like the aesthetic of the individual rooms with the
yeah,
openings only. I mean, I guess the
I get it.
GBA, the Game Boy Color games did that too for their dungeons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. So. But why I call it Zelda Light and not Zelda-like adventure game? Because in Legend of Zelda games, you have the overworld with different NPCs, some messenger quests, and the dungeons. But to my personal taste, the most interesting part in the Zelda series were the dungeons, because I like the exploration, I like the puzzle solving mechanics and all this stuff. So I decided to make a game that consists only of dungeons. Maze-like dungeons filled with different puzzles and with bosses at the end, of course. And that's why I call it Zelda Light, because it lacks the overworld part. It's only dungeons.
I'm sure that cut down on development time as well, since it's. I'd imagine it's easier to make the dungeons than it is to make the overworld. Like,
well,
in
for me
terms of like
personally,
more like the Zelda games, because uh, I'm I could be wrong on that, but yeah, it's like I can understand why you want to go for the dungeons, since they're considered to be the meat, like the thing that people really like about Zelda. Not the only part, but especially like the 2D games, like the overworld's not as praised.
mhm.
Yeah, but anyway, so how much of a task was it to expand Nighton into Nighton Plus? Like,
Oh,
how long did the game take to go through its development paces?
oh, it's also a question that I was asked very often.
Mhm.
So uh, let me get my thoughts. I like to give two answers for this question. So if we are talking in absolute numbers, it took me like a year and a half because the original 19 was released in January 2018 and 19 Plus was released in July of 2019. So it's like year and a half, and but during that period I wasn't working on 19 plus all the time because I was I had some other business to attend to, and I was working on the game only for 9 months. So it took me basically 9 months to expand it, but a year and a half in absolute time.
Okay. Not surprising, given that even though this is a fairly simple game in terms of comparing games, but even the simple games take a long time if you're just one person.
Yeah, you're right. The most time-consuming task was the level design for me.
Now, was it coming up with the actual like layout of the dungeons? Was it coming up with the puzzles? That was the most time intensive.
Uh, are you asking which task took the most time?
Yeah. What part of the what made the level design so
Ah,
intensive?
uh, every person has some tasks that this person likes to complete, and some tasks that this person hates. And level design is was always a big pain for me. It it's I consider it the most boring part, and that's why it took me so long. Because I spent lots of time lots of time fighting my procrastination and making myself to return to making levels, because I don't like making levels.
Once again, that makes sense. Like, I suppose on the inverse, what part of the development of the dungeons did you like the most?
Uh, if you are talking about the dungeons, only about the dungeons, the most interesting part for me were puzzles. Yes.
And how did you come up with the puzzles? Because they are pretty well put together.
Personally, I really like puzzle games, and I play puzzles really often on my PC and on my phone, and I just made them up in my head. I think that it's because of my overall experience in puzzle games, because I played tons of them. The ideas came really easily to me.
Okay. Like, yeah, because these are puzzles that I thought would have not been out of place in a Zelda game. Like, uh, and let me see here. How the music? Did you come up with the music as well?
Uh, so it's a very good question. Yeah, I made everything by myself except of music, because well, at the first time, I made some prototype music tracks, and I was planning to expand them and use them in the final version of the game. But then one guy from Norway called Håkon Dale contacted me. He's a chiptune composer,
Hmm.
And he said that he played the original 19 and enjoyed it a lot, and heard that I am planning to make an extended version, and offered his help. So I listened to his music, and I realized that his music is much, much better than mine, and therefore he made the whole soundtrack for 19 plus.
Oh.
But in
You,
original 19, you can hear music that was made by me. It's much more worse.
uh, uh, once again, that's pretty standard. Like, we found that usually, even among the one man studios, that if there is something that's done not by the dev, it's the music. If only, probably because that's the most distant of skill sets versus like coding and programming. Like,
Mhm.
um, and so how has the game fared since it came out?
Oh, well, I'm pretty satisfied with how it did, um, because after like 1 or 2 months, I don't remember right now. Well, let's go with 2 months. 2 months after the release, I was contacted by different console publishers that were proposing me to port it to the all actual consoles, like Xbox One, PS4, and the Nintendo Switch, of course.
Mhm.
And for me, it was a big success, because I couldn't believe that one of my games will be ever released on consoles. It was a big honor. And yeah, I signed up a contract with one of those publishers, and 19 Plus was released on the consoles like 2 weeks ago. And it's pretty cool. I enjoyed very much playing it on my own Switch. It's really fun. Um, Also, if you're asking about Steam and GOG, because I was released on GOG at the end of February too, those guys invited me to their store, which was also an honor for me, because I really support GOG because of the DRM free policy. Uh,
Right.
it's really cool. And what can I say? Uh, often speak to with other indie developers from Eastern Europe, and also from other countries, and even from USA. And sometimes we compare the numbers,
Hmm.
the sales data, the statistics between our games. And I must admit that I'm doing better than 50% of the indie game developers in the Eastern Europe, it's for sure. But yeah, it wasn't a huge success. Of course, it wasn't a bestseller, and I can't afford to buy myself a Lamborghini right now. But it's enough for living, and to support me to create to develop new games, new projects.
Well, I mean, that is actually really good to hear because not everyone gets to claim that. Like, uh, and now in terms of the console ports, did you have any sort of input or developments, collaboration with the publisher? Like, did you do the actual development and they publish it, or did they handle that?
They handled all the porting process. It was a part of our agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, I basically made some slightly changes to the source that they asked to, and they did all the rest stuff by themselves. I was involved only in a part when I had to choose the box art and things like that regarding the visuals and the
Okay.
market.
And how long did the console ports take, if you know?
So it took around 5 or 6 months.
Some pretty decent turnaround time. Like,
Hmm.
And did they do anything special for like the Switch version? Like, does Night and Plus on the Switch support, say, HD Rumble?
Frankly speaking, I I don't know because when I played 19 plus on my Switch, I didn't pay attention to the HD Rumble. I got so used to the HD Rumble vibrations that I stopped to pay attention to it.
I see. um, and were you surprised that there's a Vita version of this game as well?
Yeah. I totally forgot about Vita. It was the idea of my publisher. He said that this game is not very complex or graphically intense, so it can run on a more old hardware, like in PS Vita. And I said, well, why not? And I helped to optimize the code. It was a really a really big hassle for me because I'm more an artist than a coder, and I had to make lots of changes to my source code to optimize things because the game was running like in 10 FPS on Vita before all the optimization and refactoring. And I was really impressed when they even made a physical edition, a game cartridge for Vita. It's really cool, and I was promised that I will get one copy too, and I'm waiting because they said that they will start shipping in March.
I see, and
but I don't own Vita, but I think that I can get one for this stuff. They are pretty cheap.
Yeah, I'm like, I have no idea since, it's a PlayStation Vita and it's the year 2020. It's amazing that they are still supporting the Vita, but there they are.
Yeah, I was impressed too. I hadn't the slightest idea that Vita is popular nowadays, that it has some devoted fan base that plays on Vita till now.
I guess, like I said, I really don't know, because, when I think of the Vita, I think of something that's not really alive, but I guess it has a pulse. But anyway, now in terms of computer platforms, is this game Windows only, or are there Mac and Linux builds?
Yeah, there are Mac and Linux versions as well.
Okay, that's good. Always good to see the other formats getting support. Mm-hmm. And now, in terms of, say, a potential sequel, did you express all the ideas that you wanted to express with this expanded Nightingale game, or do you feel like you could do more with this concept? You have more dungeons, more puzzles to give to the world.
Yeah, of course. Because there are no limits to perfection. And I have plans for the sequel, but I don't know when I will start working on it, because I have another game to finish first. So I started making one game. It was called NSI Operation Zero. Started to develop it in 2017. Mm-hmm. And I was planning to release it at the end of 2018, but then I decided to take a part in that Pixel Day Jam that I mentioned before. I made 19, and it was a success, and I decided to freeze that another game to finish 19 Plus first. And now I returned to the development of that older Frozen project, and it's like more than 60% finished, and I want to release it first before I start to make any sequels.
Makes sense. And what is this other project of yours? What kind of game is it?
It looks like a platformer because you have a side-scrolling perspective with a slight isometry effect. Well, I will start posting some fresh screenshot and GIFs on Twitter soon, so you will be able to see what I'm talking about. But in terms of gameplay, it's a stealth game. So you need to sneak behind your enemies because your main character can be easily killed, but your enemies can be easily killed too. So you have to outwit them, hide from them, and take them out one by one. So each level is some kind of a crossover between a puzzle platformer and a stealth action game.
We don't get too many 2D stealth games, like so. That'll looking forward to that.
Yeah, I hope that you and other people won't be disappointed. I'm trying my best.
Well, I hope so as well. Right, so I'll turn it over to my colleagues here to see if they have any more questions for you.
I think all mine have been answered.
So it seemed like the story is pretty much just a excuse plot, basically. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah.
Like there's not like a deep lore or anything.
Yeah, there's the plot is there is just an excuse, and I did it on purpose because I remember the Carmack's words when he developed the first Doom. He said that plot in the video games hasn't to be much more complex than plot in porn movies. And I decided that I will concentrate on gameplay, not on a cliche story about some fantasy world and the guy that saves everybody from some kind of evil lich or necromancer that we heard like 100 of times in different other fantasy games.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Petty Fan, try the whole top row, the whole bottom row, and then the two in the middle on the middle row. Because that's kind of what the floor tile outline looks like.
Each floor consists of.
Oh no! I'm talking about the specific puzzle he's doing right now.
Yeah. Oh. We've been showcasing live gameplay of this.
Yeah, on Twitch.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And my colleague is giving puzzle help.
That's just the one combination that I didn't feel like had been tried in the line. Looks like that kind of.
I can give you a little hint if you want.
Okay.
Go for it.
So on the previous floor, there was a similar puzzle, and you might have noticed that there were some kind of shiny faces on the floor that were a hint, that were a solution. So there are those shiny faces on this floor as well. And you can you might have noticed that there are 12 of these buttons, and also there are 12 rooms on this floor. So it's a hint.
Yeah. So there's like a little face in the middle of the floor in each room.
Mm.
Yeah, and each of these buttons resembles a room on this floor.
That's pretty clever.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Anyway, Galix, do you have any more questions?
Not really. That was my main thing.
Okay, fair enough. Anyway, so I think that's all of our questions at this point in time. So I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your schedule and being with us here today.
Thanks for having me, and sorry for my accent and bad pronunciation. I don't speak English really often.
I'm like, it's fine. It's one of the things we have to deal with when we talk to people, internationally.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it is what it is. So I don't think it can be really helped. But anyway, so yeah, I've enjoyed Nighton Plus. I beat it a few days ago. I mean, it's about 5-6 hours, like going 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking forward to the 2D stealth game.
Oh, great. So thanks for playing my game, and I really hope that you'll enjoy my future games as well.
Indeed. And maybe we'll have you on the program when the next project is ready to be talked about in greater detail.
It will be an honor. I will gladly participate on your show again.
Thank you. Anyway, so the game is Nighton Plus. It's currently available on pretty much every major platform you can think of that's currently alive. And it retails for, at least on Steam, $5.99, and I believe the console price is $4.99. So be sure to pick this game up on your system of choice today. Right, so yeah, that'll about do it for this episode. And be sure to join us on Sunday for our review sessions. And until then, I shall wish you good gaming.